Speaking of the devil, I just showed my rod jaw and stuff in cold steel. I got a few blanks here. They come from the factory, and I touched this one up on the sides here. This is McPlatypus's knife right here. This is a cold steel SRK in carbon 5, carbon V, but the V is Roman numeral for 5. This is SRK blank. You can see how it is rounded off. I get the light. See the rounded edges? They stamp these in one stamp in a big press, which usually would be like either A2 or D2 in this knife shape, and a big thing with a 90-degree off and a bottom shape like that, and it just boom, stamp these out, and hundreds at a time, thousands at a time. That's what A2 is used for. A2 and D2. D2 is a little tougher when it comes to building dies like that. Or I'm a tool and die maker by trade. Mostly go by machinist, but I work at a tool and die shop, and I do build dies and tooling for dies. And I primarily run wire ADM. We got CNCs, run them, and I know manual mill, surface grind, all that very well. Not as well as people have been doing it for 50 freaking years, but it's just something you gain your skill. The more years you have in it, the more you know. I predominantly run wire ADM rooms, so I program, set up, and run wire ADM. But this is an SRK, carbon 5. This blank. When they changed over to, they ground it off, where it's this cold steel SRK, so I have to grind this. I might just take it to a surface grinder, or I can put it flat up in the flat in there, but I might just take these surface grinding. But it said cold steel SRK and stuff. You can see they overheated a little bit. But when they changed to the SAMI 3 as their top model, or the carbon 5, they had these blanks blanked out that were just in the beginning of the production stage. Well, they get rid of that stuff, and because they changed over to SAMI 3, and I can pick these blanks up pretty cheap from the same guy I bought my rod jaw from, and a bunch of my other cold steel stuff. He's a cold steel dealer, and he gets these leftover blanks from him. What I'm going to show you next is a cold steel. This is mine. The day I went and bought this, or when McPlatypus was with me, he bought the SRK because he only had one of them. He had two of these, and I should have picked up the second, or Platypus kind of kicked himself for not getting this. This is a Recon Tonto, and you can see they ground it down. They ground away the writing here, but this is one. You can see how it's stamped out, and this is rough ground. It's been sitting here a while. I rough ground it and didn't quite finish it. I actually have a bookmark page now of the heat treating info on carbon 5 from cold steel, so that's one thing I needed. But this is rough ground out, just about ready for heat treat. But this is with my old equipment and technique. I ground this one out. So that's a rough ground Recon Tano carbon 5 cold steel blank. They blanked it. I did the grinding on the angles. It just came flat. When I got this, it looked just like this SRK does. It's just a flat chunk of steel, and there's a big lump on the ends because they stamp them, and that point will get all smashed down. Platypus brought this over the other night when he came to leave it here because he wants me to grind it up now that I have a new grinder, and we're buddies, so he wants some work done, obviously. But buddies take care of each other. So it's how I treat my friends. If you can't treat your friends good like that, I don't know what the hell. But he left it here so I can grind her up for him, and we can get her heat treated, and he can get a handle on it, and it'll be up to him to do the handle and all that shit. But that's how they come, just stamped out. And that's how this was when I got it. And there's the grind on it. It'd be nice if I could stamp out blades like that, but I profile them, half hour give or take on the knife. And you just grind out the shape, which, in starting part 1, you've seen how I do that. That's a little different by handmade once-off knives and production knives, excuse me. But that's also kind of a testament. Because if cold steel knows anything what they're doing, or even whoever builds their machinery for them, it's going to either be made of A2 tool steel or D2 tool steel, more than likely. Possibly the worst solving you do if you do a high production run, but it's usually with thinner materials, nothing thick like a knife. You can use tungsten carbide, which that's where I really come into play with my job. Is you can't cut tungsten carbide. You can with diamond, but you don't go cutting out a knife profile or weird electronic connector profiles with it. That's where wire EDM comes into play, and that maybe I'll put some videos up on that from down at work. But that basically takes a brass wire that's plated, got some weird plating on it, but submerges this in distilled water or metal, and it runs a piece of wire in electricity, and it burns away, and it flushes it out with water. So the electricity burns the metal away. The water kind of does the cutting. If you don't have flushing, it wouldn't cut, and the wire will snap. But that thing goes, I can program shit in to be as accurate as like 1 or 2 microns, and actually individual adjustments on the machine go in 1 microns. When I hit the button to move the table, unless I put it up into like a rapid mode, it moves 1 micron per press of the button. And I was just speaking about that in the last video about how minute a micron is. I'd have to hit that button 8 times to have the table move either X or Y, and to go the distance to be as wide as an average human red blood cell. So they're about the most accurate. You see, they work a lot like people get things laser cut and stuff, and that's awesome for sheet metal and everything. Laser cut, water jetting, they're great. But a wired EM will do much thicker. It'll do much more accurate no matter how thin or thick it is. 10 times or more accurate. And the thicker you get into stuff, there's no way a water jet or a laser or anything is remotely close to as accurate as a wire EDM. So if you want to know what the most accurate machine is to cut stuff out, it's a wire EDM machine. EDM stands for electronic discharge machine. That's what EDM stands for. So it discharges electricity, kind of like plasma cuts, but it plasma cuts on whatever. If my finger is the wire here, and I was going to cut this out, this would have electricity. There's actually a little gap. It's called the spark gap, and the spark would be gapped in between there, and these burnt little molecules of metal, and the water flushes it away, and then it works its way around, and it'll work its way around whatever shape or whatever, just like a CNC or something will work. But that's what I do, and that's what I know about. And if A2 and or D2, which I experiment with D2 knives, my favorite is A2. D2 is a little more brittle, which if say you were stamping out knives and you had an A2 or D2 die, you had a D2 tool steel, but the die, the edges kept getting dull and chipping out, you would say, well, it's chipping out too bad. You would step back and go to A2. A2 will dull faster than D2, but it won't chip out as much. So when it comes to using for a knife blade, where you're getting real fine and you're actually cutting with a fine edge, not a die would be just a 90-degree edge like that, and the edge would chip out. And then A2's a little tougher in that way. You would step back to that, or same difference if you were tungsten carbide, you would step back to D2, or you could go to a really more exotic metal, as a CPM 10V, and there's a couple other CPM types, but the most common I work with is CPM 10V. I made some carving blades and knives out of that, and that's a really awesome metal to work with. It's more brittle, and not more brittle. Technically, kind of is more brittle than D2, and it's harder and tougher than D2. But when it's put into a knife blade, it doesn't chip out nearly as much as D2 does on the edge. But that's an extreme. Like A2 is an extremely expensive metal. That CPM 10V, it's made by a company called Crucible. That metal is just ridiculous. The cost of it and the strength of it, but I wouldn't go making some kind of like hunting or bushcraft knife with it. It's still a little too brittle for that. If you're really gonna pry and stuff or go and baton it, baton through a log or something, I wouldn't be using it for that. Not to mention this here already. This knife blank, just the stock alone, definitely cost 2+ times the amount it costs for like a good 1095 or something cost. It's not all alloyed out like this. And 1095 is an extremely great metal. I would not talk down on it, but if you want like the ultimate knife for most applications, I wouldn't even say A2 is best for all. It isn't. It is not. But most applications, my personal preference, and I think even a lot of whatever studies or testing go by it, A2 is predominantly, in most cases, about the best thing you can go with, other than cost of material. That's for sure. But I guess there I stopped grinding a bit, and there's a little bit of my philosophy on A2 tool steel while we're in the middle of the process of grinding this knife. And it kind of might get a little boring, or you might be interested in just watching me grind. And that's what I'm doing. But I got a few breaks here. Some things popped into my head. I have ADD pretty bad, or adult ADD, because I'm an adult, 30 years old, and some stuff like that pops in my head, and I figured I'd just stop and take a minute to chat about it and educate people who don't know. And I might get hate mail from people who might know other things otherwise, but I'd be hard pressed if you know as much as I know about metal. You'll probably agree with me on a lot of this stuff. And there's a lot of knife makers out there. They're the best in the world, man. They can make knives that are so beautiful and have designs unlike anything I've made yet, or might not make for the next 10 or 15 years. But they don't use a metal near as good as A2, because they just started making knives, and they're looking at material cost, and they're looking at what people know. Like 1095 is an awesome steel, and it does make an awesome high carbon blade. And it's tough, it's strong, it takes a good edge, it holds a good edge. Nothing wrong with that, for sure. And I might not know dick in comparison. I know a good bit about making knives, but yeah, in comparison, I might not know dick about making knives to them. But since I come from a machining and tool and die background, my knowledge on metallurgy and compositions and metal properties and all that, that kind of is where I get into where I make my knives out of A2 predominantly. Wouldn't be making throwing knives or machetes or nothing out of A2. Then I'd be looking more to 1095, which I'd even be a little more brittle. I might go to like a 1060 or 1080. And I believe most K-bars are 1080. And that's a really good tough steel. I mean, you could depend your life on it. If you were dropped in the middle of the woods with a knife and a fire steel, and you had to be Mr. Survival dude, I would trust my life on a knife made of 1080 or 1095. I know it's going to have a good edge. It's going to hold the edge. I can use it. I can beat the shit out of it, and the blade ain't going to snap on me. That's for damn sure. But I just know this steel is going to get sharper. It's going to stay sharper longer, and it costs way too much to buy in most cases for a lot of production. But so since 1095 stuff and 1080 does so well, I guess a lot of people that want to keep themselves priced in the market in like a big production run, there's no sense to try and do this. But I know they do make some K-bars and like special, more expensive models in D2, and I myself like to stick with the A2. D2 does a lot better if it's cryogenically treated. The edge will chip out a lot less. And I haven't messed with cryogenically treating any of my own blades, A2, D2, or whether otherwise. But with heat treating and putting them in the draw furnace twice, it's called a double draw. But in industry, you call it drawing or a draw furnace. What that basically is tempering. Most things you'll see where they say we're going to temper the blade, or the temper. Putting it in the draw is tempering the metal. It draws the brittleness out of it. So what I do is I heat treat to 60, and I double draw it 2 times, so it relaxes the steel and makes it less brittle, keeps it real nice and tough. Doing it that second time does a lot. But there wasn't much grinding in this video. There's a lot of talking, but I have to end the video now. Looks like my memory card's about done, and my battery's about done, and I'm almost on 15 minutes. So we'll pick up on the next part. A little more roughing, and gonna get a finer grit.